All right, let's talk about the Shroud of Turin. For over 100 years, this thing has puzzled everyone believers, scientists, you name it. It's one of the most studied objects ever. But now, a brand new clue just dropped, and it's a massive curveball. So let's get right into it. So here's the question that just exploded online. Could this ancient relic actually be from India? I know, it sounds wild. A new study that came out in March of 2026 hints at this surprising connection, but is that the whole story? We're going to separate what the science really says from all the hype. Okay, so what happened? A new study, a preprint actually, and we'll get to what that means later, just dropped, and boom, it had this one bombshell finding that just went completely viral. So, here's the big reveal. The researchers took a look at all the human DNA on the shroud, and what they found was stunning. Almost 40% of it, nearly half, belongs to genetic groups most common in the Indian subcontinent. Now, think about that. That is a huge, totally unexpected twist in this story. And you can guess what happened next, right? The headlines went crazy. The idea that the shroud itself could be from India spread like wildfire online. I mean, it's a wild thought, isn't it? But before we get too carried away, let's pump the brakes for a second. Because to really get what this new DNA study means, we need a little background. We have to look at what science has already figured out and what it hasn't. Let's be clear, the shroud is scientifically strange. Really strange. The image on it, it's not paint, it's not a dye, it's not a scorch mark. It's this incredibly shallow discoloration just on the very, very top fibers. And here's the craziest part. It somehow encodes 3D information. A normal picture just can't do that. People have been scientifically studying this thing for a long, long time. Way back in 1898, the very first photograph showed that the image is like a negative. That was a huge shock. Then, in 1978, a whole team of scientists did the first deep dive. But the biggest date, the one everyone talks about, is 1988. Okay, now understand this. This is key. In 1988, they took a small piece of the shroud and sent it to 3 different, independent labs for radiocarbon dating. All 3 came back with the same result. The cloth itself dates to the Middle Ages, somewhere between 1260 and 1390. For decades, that has been the scientific consensus, period. So, where does this new DNA study fit into all that? I mean, does this evidence from the University of Padova just blow that whole timeline out of the water? Let's take a closer look. First off, the researchers didn't get a new sample from the shroud. What they did was brilliant. They analyzed dust that was literally vacuumed off the cloth way back in 1978. The difference? They used brand new, powerful technology to sequence every single piece of DNA they could find in that old dust. So with all that Indian DNA, the authors suggested a theory, a hypothesis. They said, hey, maybe the linen yarn itself was actually made near the Indus Valley. Then it could have been traded and brought to the Middle East. It's an interesting idea for sure. But, and this is the part that got completely buried by the headlines, the researchers themselves were super, super cautious about their findings. In fact, here's a direct quote from their study. They said the shroud came into contact with multiple individuals, thereby challenging the possibility of identifying the original DNA. What they're saying is, so many people have handled this thing over the centuries that finding any original DNA is almost impossible. The contamination is just off the charts. And yeah, they didn't just find DNA from India, not by a long shot. They found DNA from Western Europeans, from the Near East, from the Arabian Peninsula. It's basically a genetic map of its entire history, a fingerprint from everyone who has ever touched it. And it gets even weirder. They also found a ton of non-human DNA. I'm talking cats, chickens, and get this, bananas and peanuts, even red coral. Yes, you heard me right, bananas. It just goes to show you how much stuff this cloth has picked up over hundreds of years. And this is the single most important point. Listen to this. DNA on an object only proves one thing, contact. It does not prove origin. It just means someone or something from that place touched it. A pilgrim from India could have touched the shroud centuries ago. That's all that would take to leave that DNA behind. So, okay, the whole made in India thing seems pretty shaky. But even after we clear that up, we're still left staring at the real mystery of the shroud. And that's the image itself. After decades and decades of study, nobody has been able to successfully fake it. No one knows how it was formed. No one can explain that 3D data. Science simply does not have the answer. And that's really the heart of it all, isn't it? The central puzzle is still completely unsolved. And that's why everybody, from believers to the biggest skeptics, keeps coming back to it.
So why did this DNA story blow up the way it did? What's the real lesson here?
First thing, remember what I said earlier? The study was a preprint. Now that's important. It means it hadn't been peer-reviewed yet. No other scientists had checked their work. The story went viral before science could even do its job. Honestly, this whole thing is a masterclass in how we get information today. It shows you the huge difference between the actual data and the catchy headline or interpretation. And that's the real takeaway. The data just showed Indian DNA is present, but the interpretation, what people wanted it to mean, was the shroud is from India. You see the leap? The shroud is like a mirror. It reflects our own biases and our desire for a neat, simple answer. So in the end, this new DNA clue doesn't really solve anything. It just adds one more fascinating layer to an already deep mystery. It's a reminder that some questions, well, they just remain gloriously open. And isn't that way more interesting than any simple headline?